All right, can y'all hear me okay? All right, so good evening. So for our in-person guests tonight, I wanted to highlight that the mayor and a number of our city council members, as well as your fellow citizens, are watching via streaming services on Facebook and on YouTube. The city attorney and I advised our elected officials not to attend tonight or risk turning this engagement into a quorum, and this is not a public hearing, it's a feedback session. So assembled here on behalf of the city is our Chief of Public Safety, John Thomas, to my left, and across the row from me here is from JLA, Darren Prickett, and Mark Costner from Capstone Services, and I'm Jim Clifford, your city administrator. So to get everyone caught up to speed, as our city was conducting due diligence on the East Buena Vista Avenue property, where the public safety headquarters is currently slated to go, came across three areas of concern. The first was the location was not the preferred location of the public safety leadership and personnel. The second was the site on East Buena Vista had no expansion capability. So if we put the building in the current site there at East Buena Vista 20, 30 years from now, if we decided to do a bump out the way that that site lines out, we don't have the ability to do it there. And lastly, as we looked at it, we figured out that it was going to be significantly more expensive to put it there at East Buena Vista to the tune of about $850,000. So after we came up with those things, I asked the staff to relook our other options, specifically what was known as as known as the Flythe and Seven Gables property on Georgia Avenue, as the city already owns that property. And the staff and I feel, after an initial analysis, that the Georgia Avenue properties are the best site for the public safety headquarters. So to date, the staff has spoken with the Planning Commission with a sketch plan review, to a few of our nonprofits who I see are represented here this evening, and to some individual citizens who are also here tonight. And then for tonight, this assembled group to talk about how we could potentially make this happen and what's the best way to do it. So because of the rules of capital project sales tax, the property that was procured there on Georgia Avenue was bought with what is known as CPST4, and that's a ballot referendum item. And so that means that I can only spend, or the city can only spend, that money in very specific ways, specifically the things that are listed on the CPST4 ballot. The only infrastructure project or facility on CPST4 is the public safety headquarters. So the answer to the question is, could I put another city facility there instead of the public safety headquarters? Our understanding is no. So if I'm not allowed to put the public safety headquarters at that location, based on the legal opine that I have from our city attorney, then I'm required to sell the property to the highest bidder. So there have been some earlier discussions about, does the city have the ability to gift or deed the property or a portion of the property over to a historic group, an interest group, to maintain the historic buildings there on Observatory Avenue? And the answer is no, not allowed to do that. I've got to sell the properties for the highest value that can be procured and then put that money back into the capital project sales tax bin. So essentially that leaves us with two options as a city. So we're either going to move forward and put the public safety headquarters on Georgia Avenue, or I'm going to sell the property on behalf of the city to the highest bidder and move forward in that kind of way. So those are the solutions or the issues that I'm issued with right now, and I'm hoping to be able to move forward on at least one of those. And so for that reason, we've embarked to ask the council for our ability to zone the property at Georgia Avenue as P for public use. That would allow us to eventually put the public safety headquarters at that location. And if the city grants me that, or city council grants me that authority, then we would likely be in front of the Planning Commission in September with follow-on votes with the city council in October. And all of those venues are venues where citizens have the opportunity to talk directly with the city council or the Planning Commission, depending on which council we're talking about. So in order to have some structure for tonight's input session, what I'd like to do is, if we could, is have the citizens that have counter proposals. So if you have an idea about the public safety headquarters not going to Georgia Avenue, you think there's a different place it ought to go, and I know one of our citizens has provided some pretty detailed information about where public safety headquarters could go, why don't we have that conversation first for alternate courses of action on locations for the public safety headquarters. So if there are any citizens that would like to talk about options for the city aside from Georgia Avenue, why don't we get those on the table first, and then after that we can go have a discussion with citizens that have specific inputs for the Georgia Avenue site, and we'll see where that leads us. So I would turn it over to any interested party that would like to put something on the table in a public forum about options for the city to put the public safety headquarters someplace other than Georgia Avenue at this time. Mr. Lardy, would you like to come down and make a statement?
My name is Fred Alardi. I live at 346 Shoreline Drive in North Augusta. I was a little surprised tonight at the format. I expected this to be a give and take between council people and other people, and I'm shocked to see that nobody's here, including the mayor. It always seems to astound me that the rules changed at the last minute, but let's proceed. One of the things I think, Jim, that you mentioned, and if I can call you Jim, is that you were trying or attempting to make North Augusta a destination. And in order to make a destination, you have to have some place to go. You just can't declare yourself a destination and then have people show up. And you have a piece of property that is rich in historical value. It's at least 120 years old. It was developed by a man that everybody looks at as the founder of North Augusta. And by the way, he also built the Flythe property that we're discussing tonight. So I think we need to take a long, hard look at getting rid of that property. And let me digress a little. I guess about 2 years ago, and you said something in your opening comments that I sort of disagree with. You said there were only two choices. If I remember correctly, Mr. Glover said he evaluated 10 to 12 choices at that particular time. What happened to those choices?
So a number of those choices are no longer options for the city, and currently the city doesn't own any of those other properties. So with one exception being the community center / tennis court area, and that was an area that the Planning Commission asked us to do some additional due diligence on based on the feedback we got from Commissioner, I believe, Key there at the Planning Commission. So there's a limited amount of city-owned properties to work with, and so in order to move forward with any of these other properties, the city would have to procure additional property to move forward. So when Todd Glover made his statements about the different sites that they were looking at, that was prior to the purchase of the Flythe and Seven Gables property. And so what I'm dealing with now is the city owns that property, and so I am required to either build the public safety headquarters, at least my understanding, or have to sell it to the highest bidder. So, theoretically, could you sell it to the highest bidder and then pick a new spot for the public safety headquarters? You could, but at what cost, I don't know, and certainly at an impact to the time frame for the building.
Is there a time frame on when that particular property needs to be sold by?
I'm not sure if there's a legal framework on when the property has to be sold by.
So if we stopped everything right now, and there doesn't seem to be any urgency because we've let 2 or 3 or 4 years go by. I know Chief Thomas is here and he wants to move his people out of public safety building because of the conditions of that particular building. But we've spent a lot of time just kind of twiddling our thumbs up to this point. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if I would characterize it as that way, but you could certainly say that this is a project that's been under consideration for quite some time.
Okay. So given that, if we now started to evaluate other pieces or other options, and I have a few that I'd like to put on the table today, you've limited down to 2, and I'm going to take exception to your, I don't know if the gentlemen are here tonight that prepared the evaluation. I didn't get these gentlemen's names.
I'm sorry, you have Mark Costner and Darren Prickett.
Where are they from?
Darren is from JLA, which is one of our engineering and architect firms that's advising us on this, and Mark Costner is our construction project manager from Capstone Services.
Okay, so maybe we should get very specific, because what you did at the last meeting was prepare a presentation. Lots of words. Bottom line is, it's netted out, and there's, to quote what you said before, and by the way, I don't want to take a lot of time. If there are other people that want to speak, tell me, is there a limit on how long I can go?
Well, I'd prefer to give everybody an opportunity to speak, so if you wanted to kind of go through some of your kind of high points, or if you're going to give me a homework assignment, if you will, I'll take those as well.
It's going to take a little bit, because this is an interesting subject. I've spent a lot of time looking at it. Bottom line is, it appears to me that the numbers were put in this particular chart in order to make it suited for the choice that somebody wanted it to come out to. There's an $800,000 difference. Now let's just go over a few of them. Okay, so that we all agree, there's a $329,000 underground retention pond for both properties.
That's correct.
Okay, everybody agree to that? It's there? Okay. There's an amount of $446,000 under the East Buena Vista site for a retaining wall. Can somebody explain why that wall cost so much, what it's going to do?
So in the interest of time, what I'd like to do is turn the mic over to Darren Prickett, who's done the engineering analysis for the East Buena Vista site, and he is in a position to talk a little more intelligently about the retaining wall, the soil stabilization project, because ultimately that's the largest cost driver for the city at the East Buena Vista site, is what we call site prep for that location. So Darren, if you wouldn't mind trying to crack at Mr. Lardy's question on the total cost or the breakdown of why it's expensive to do the retaining wall and the soil stabilization.
Sure. So in order to develop that particular site to its potential, with the site improvements that are required, parking, setbacks, the building's footprint itself, we have to push the building along that property line. In some areas on that cut slope, it's an existing cut slope, you have 20 to 30 foot height in that slope, and a lot of it's almost vertical. So because of the soil type, because of the height of the slope, the proximity of the building and the infrastructure to that slope, we have to retain it. The idea, though, was not to retain it with a full height retaining wall, which would be astronomically expensive, but to stabilize that slope with some other engineering technique, probably soil nails or similar. So the reality is the most economical way to stabilize the slope in order to use the full potential of the site was a combination of a hard wall, a brick wall, a block wall, whatever you want to call it, vertical separation, along with a engineered approach. Unfortunately, the way that bluff, that slope was laid down thousands, hundreds, thousands, millions of years ago, and 7 movements of the Atlantic Ocean and the shoreline with it are called terraces, and all they are sands and silts. They're extremely erodible and move a lot. So unfortunately, because of that environmental condition that we have no control over, that's why that expense is in that retaining system.
How big is this wall?
So in some areas the wall is 10 to 12 feet, and then the rest of it will be in an engineered approach.
Why are we running a wall of 10 feet? Are you expecting that much water to roll off that hill?
It has nothing to do with the water. The water has nothing to do with it.
What are you trying to hold back?
We're holding back a slope that is not stable. As soon as somebody else develops the property above us, and they put the pressures of those buildings and the infrastructure on that slope, if it's not stable, it's called global destabilization, and you'll get sloughing. The slope will fail and undermine our foundations and their foundations. So you have to stabilize the slope in order to protect the investment on our property, but also what could potentially happen in the future we have no control over.
Has any other
Want that loss?
Has any other alternative been explored except the wall there?
There is no alternative.
Okay. Okay. Number B. There is an amount of $937,000 for soil stabilization. The property was previously used as a factory. It held heavy equipment. There were people running in and out of that property. The city used it to store heavy equipment. Why all of a sudden do we need to stabilize the soil?
Yes, sir. So all we're stabilizing is the slope that was not built upon. So when they graded that site, they graded it to maximize their building pad or their pad of activity, whatever they were doing, recapping tire treads and what have you. But when they cut that site, they got the most usable area. They probably cut the slope back to a slope or to a grade that we would normally not do that at this day. And our practices are a little bit different. So they probably cut it back to a 2-to-1 or 1.5-to-1, which is basically a vertical slope. But when they did that, that is one of the reasons why the slope has continued to denude. If you were to go back and take the trees off of it now, you really can't see it because all the trees are on it. There are areas where it's vertical, and there are actually areas where it has slumped inside. So you've got cliffs, you've got a bluff hanging over the slope, so it's beyond vertical. And so back then they did things differently, but the soil stabilization is only pertaining to the slope itself. So whatever we don't retain with wall, we're going to use soil stabilization, soil nails or similar, to basically pierce all the levels of sands that were laid down over those seven terraces I talked about. And what those nails do is they pierce them, they connect them, and they give them rigidity. They give them, they basically act as a wall. It's a whole lot less expensive than taking a full height wall to a 30-foot height.
Okay,
So it was a measure of trying to take care of try to do something else a little bit more engineer approach that would be aesthetically pleasing but also economical.
Is there any other way to position the building that we intend to build on that property to eliminate that particular problem?
There are ways you could make the building 4 or 5 stories tall, but the zoning ordinance won't allow that. So under the zoning conditions, that's the only way that
I
building
didn't hear
can go on
that
site.
part. Won't allow what?
You can't build a multi-story building there. So
Why?
The zoning ordinance won't allow it.
Wait a second now. We control the zoning laws, don't we?
So what the reason the building is there is to basically put the square footage we have to have there under zoning conditions and allow enough parking. So,
But has the city been asked about changing the zoning on that particular property in order to accommodate a different size building?
I'm not aware of that.
So if we start from the drawing board and go to a 5-story building or a 4-story building or whatever that entails, that's time and money. So ultimately, a brand new design is going to be at least another, let's call it $500,000 to deconstruct the current design that we have and start from scratch. So ultimately, there's a cost factor there, and there's also a time factor, which again we're working against.
Okay.
Nor can you expand it.
We can argue back and forth on this property, and it was an option at one time, and obviously there's much more technical guys here than I don't want to argue with them. They seem to know what they're doing. Let's move on. Okay. The second property I would propose is the community center property. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. It sits there. We collect about $70,000 in rent a year for that building. It's not utilized. It's got a big parking lot. It could probably, with a little engineering, go up 2 feet. It'll hold 500 or 600 people. Why not consider that?
So again, I will defer to Darren, but I would tell you there are some significant challenges on that site that have to do with drainage. And at the location of the site there, you've got some significant stormwater problems, and then you've got the cost of the bump outs and things that go along with that. And then also, does the city want to part with the community center and the functions that go there? Even though it's not heavily utilized, they still conduct their elections there. We do blood donations there. We do the summer camps for the kids there. So if we remove that facility, where do all those functions go? But for the practical perspective of construction, Darren, if there's anything you'd like to put on the table about some of the challenges that we see associated with, the community center / tennis courts area.
Yes, sir. So we were asked to look at that site. The site has significant challenges in that it sits at a low point. It is a large drainage area contributes to that site. So if you're at the large culvert that goes under the road at that site, so it goes over to the River Club and empties into the River Club. There's a huge culvert, a box culvert under the street. Upstream of that is this site that we're referring to. So geologically, there is a natural drainage course that goes through there. That's why the culvert's there. So with that, over the, I'm going to go back and talk about millions of years ago, the material that's deposited there. And it's in a wide swath. So where they put the community center is about the only place you can build a building unless you go with specialized foundations, piling, and et cetera. So, and the layout of the property, it's very steep in the rear where the pavilion is and off in the back of the community center. So topographically, geologically, there's just a lot of challenges with the site. When we looked at it originally, we were asked to look at, conceptually looking at whether we could renovate the existing facility and then add on to it. And that time we were talking about a combined use fire station and public safety facility. And we had a concept in place, very difficult to do. You could only back the trucks in. We didn't have enough room to get for the trucks to go in and around. So, long story short, the challenges we saw were significant expense in undercutting material that wouldn't work, or with piling being used to support the facility.
Mr. Allard, if I would, it's I've got 6:20 now. I'd like to see if we can, give the other citizens a shot at 6:30. So if we can get through a few points, and then we can come back to you again from the.
Anybody else wants to speak?
Absolutely. Do we have anybody else who wants to speak? One.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll cut let's go to the last one that I have right now, and I would like to come back.
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about the MEDAC building, which is probably the easiest approach since it's built and there are 30,000 square feet available. And at last looking at the real estate listing this morning, it's still available. And if we were really considering it, we could get it fairly cheap. It's about $15 a square foot. It would cost us a considerable less than the interest it's going to cost on the loan we're going to take out if we just rented it. So why don't you talk about the MEDAC building?
So I would tell you that I've done some due diligence on the MEDAC building. You had sent me a note several weeks ago about the MEDAC building and talked to the developer about the cost of the MEDAC building, which is higher than I would like to pay, quite frankly. And then the other issue with the MEDAC building, I went through our bond attorneys to find out whether that was legally permissible based on it being in a TIF district. And the answer is yes. So theoretically, you could put a government facility or a function inside that building. The downside, though, is you're getting roughly $100,000 a year from the MEDAC in tax revenue that serves the TIF, which pays the bond payments for Riverside Village. So ultimately, if I take that out of the mix and make that a government function, which doesn't pay taxes, then I'm withdrawing another significant amount of money that goes into the debt service for our site.
Why are you not renting it?
Well, I'm not renting it because I'm not the owner.
In the city not considering renting that facility as opposing to purchase it?
I don't think it's a wise investment to rent public safety headquarters unless in an extreme circumstance. I think we ought to own the facility that we go forward on.
I think our police commissioner would agree. He could move in tomorrow. The building is empty.
I don't believe he could move in tomorrow because he doesn't.
Within reason. Obviously, it has to be retrofitted to his requirements, but it's up. There's no construction involved. It looks pretty. By the way, it makes a nice entrance to our city. Got City Hall right here, and you have public safety building right adjacent to it. And by the way, you're drawing people into the middle of the town is what I thought we were trying to accomplish.
I would tell you I'm not favorably inclined to a rental solution. If you'd like to, bring that to the city council's
idea.
idea.
Only as an option right now. There are other options. I'm sure many other people might have, but there are three viable. I heard the technical problems. I don't agree fully with the community center. I think that to a degree was an exaggeration, my personal opinion. But I think MEDAC is going to cause us grief in the future. He has a history. I think you learn a lot from history in dealing with a developer. He has been a sore in everybody's arm right now, or foot, whatever we want to call it. He hasn't delivered on anything. He now owns a building, and he's lost. He promised us 650 people. of which there are probably 40 people in the building right now. And we lost all that revenue, but nobody says a word about it. Nobody goes back and provides any pushback to that developer. We just let him do whatever he wants to do. And now I'm giving you a fairly easy solution to a problem. Why don't we do a little bit more research on that? And with that, I'll end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lardy. Appreciate it. Gentleman in the back. If you wouldn't mind, sir, as you come to the mic, please state your name.
My name's Ken Powell. I live at 320 Clay Street. I understood from J&L representative that there were challenges with fire trucks at the community center and the design when the entire complex consisted of a fire station as well as public safety headquarters. Half of that picture is resolved. The fire station is moved now. Has anybody looked at the community center? The fire station portion is now gone, and evaluated that technically and come forward with the numbers so that council can be informed to make an informed decision. And while I'm there, I'd like to know, have the numbers that J&L developed for using the Buena Vista site, now as I understand, you're saying you can't have a sloped grade because you're too close to the property line, is that correct?
We're having to get as close to the property line as we possibly can.
Okay.
So it will be we're gonna lay it back and build a retaining wall and have to stabilize the slope because we can't change the materials.
But you can't compensate for your problem of slough off of the bank in place by sloping.
Yeah.
You cannot do that. Okay. So my statement really is, has anybody looked at the community center now with the fire station carved out of it completely?
I don't know.
Okay, thank you. There's your another option. I'd like to suggest there's property across the street, Martintown Road from White Saber. It's been for sale for years. Mr. Glover was here. He said that property was sold. It wasn't available.
I don't believe that property is currently available.
It's got a for sale sign on it.
We've been in dialogue with developers that are working on that property right now. So I'm not sure if that's contingent or how that's going to work, but there are other commercial plans for that site currently.
There may be plans, but I'm saying the way this city spends money, if you can go to a person that's got a piece of property for sale, he may be willing to deal with you. He may be willing to talk with you. Has anybody approached the owner of that facility for our public safety headquarters?
I have not.
Okay, there's another option. And finally, what is this property on Buena Vista zoned as? That would be, I doubt these gentlemen know. What's the zoning for Buena Vista?
I'd have to look it up for you, sir.
Okay, it's probably P for public use. I would assume it's P since you're already designing to put a public facility there. You're also in the process of rewriting the development code. Okay? The issue came up, Mr. Lardy's suggestion, about a building that could be taller than 1 story, and the answer is it's not allowed per the development code. Well, you know what? The fire station wasn't allowed per the development code, but the city voted to exempt themselves. And if they can do it there, they can do it here.
So not to be in conflict with Mr. Prickett, but the issue isn't zoning at the Buena Vista site from my perspective. The issue is the redesign of the building and the ability to expand. So ultimately, could we rezone that section, or could we ask for an exemption by BZA or some other kind of methodology? I think the answer is yes. But at the end of the day, do we want to put a taller building on that site for the time constraints that we have, or the other major factor, which is the expandability of the site, which is another concern we have about the community center? I'd like to be able to make sure that the facility that we build has the ability to have a bump out at some point in time if that requirement exists 30 or 40 years from now. We're excited to see what the census data is going to bring out today, but I think we're going to see pretty safely that North Augusta has grown pretty considerably in the last 10 years. I suspect it will continue to do so.
Okay, time constraints. You just said from Mr. Lardy that there's no time limit that you're aware of, that we have to make a decision with the Seven Gables property, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So, other than public safety needing a facility, which I don't think anybody would disagree with that, why start a design until you're 100% convinced that you've got the right location? Why spend the money that's been spent so far? And I know you weren't here at the time. I understand that. But why not, and that's why the community's here tonight, is to discuss options that can be done. Why not, and I know you have, shut them down to the extent you can, other than the common work that could happen between Seven Gables and Univista. But why not stop design until we as a city can come together and agree on the right location? Your dollars are charged. If you did that right now, you'd save a heck of a lot of money, and you might end up adding 2 stories to solve the problem of your, what, $400 and some odd thousand brick wall and your soil remediation. So I've given you 2 options that I think, you know, we ought to look at as a city, across from White Saver, that property, and the community center, that now that the fire station is no longer part of that scope. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Powell. Appreciate it. Do we have any other citizens that would like to talk about other options outside the Georgia Avenue property? Hearing none, I'd like to open the floor to any citizens that would like to talk about concerns about the public safety headquarters on Georgia Avenue and design considerations, traffic considerations, those kinds of things. If there is anybody that would like to talk through that, I'd be happy to have you come. Dr. Newell?
My name is Mark Newell, Historic North Augusta, 826 Georgia Avenue. It's my understanding, given the 2 options that you talk about, that if the public headquarters go in that location, the 2 buildings on the site now will be saved and will be turned over to community groups for some kind of development. On the other hand, if you sell the property, it's my understanding that developers have already contacted the city. Can you tell us what kind of development is likely to go on that location? And if that kind of development would give us the option of working with the developer to split off or buy the property that contains the 2 buildings.
Dr. Newell, I would tell you that unsolicited, I've been contacted by a number of developers for the Georgia Avenue site. And so it went through a pretty wide range of types of people. Some I considered much more serious than others. We had a group from an animal shelter, an AKC group, American Kennel Club, asked about a portion of that property for their use. I had a senior living facility out of Florida that is interested in that facility or that site as well, where based on the acreage, they would require every bit of that acreage to put their facility on it. And I had a different developer contact us about putting townhomes on that site as well, where again, their intent would be to have, you know, the whole use of the property for all 3 of those parcels that are collected together. So we're not able to act on any of those things right now. We had some folks that put offers on the table unsolicited, but they did not go through the city procurement process, so I'm not able to do anything with those, nor had the city made a final decision on those properties. So, you know, the original site plan that we presented, the sketch plan review to the Planning Commission, understanding the concerns of a number of citizens and also some of the nonprofits, one of which you represent, was to maintain the heritage of the site and being able to do so with the 2 homes on Observatory Avenue. And so as part of the way forward on Georgia Avenue, if that's ultimately where the city puts this facility, all of our design specifications, or at least my guidance to JLA as the designers and the engineers of record, is that those 2 facilities are not to be included as far as demolition, that any kind of road work we do, parking or building location does not upset those 2 facilities or those 2 buildings.
My concern is that if a developer buys the property, the likelihood is that they'll use every square inch of that property for parking or for the development, and that there won't be a possibility of saving those 2 buildings at all. Whereas if the public police headquarters goes up there, we know the buildings will be saved, or we're assured they will be. So basically, it gives us, puts us in the position of supporting the best of two bad choices. And obviously, our principal interest for Historic North Augusta is to preserve those two buildings because of their importance.
And just so I'm clear, for the assembled group as well, when we talk about the buildings on Observatory as far as, holding on to those, what it does not include is the single-story motel in the middle of the property. So that's the brick building that's there. Regardless, if the city does something at that site, that's going to have to go. That's not able to be saved, nor do I think there's a strong interest in saving it.
Okay, thank you.
And actually, what I'd like to do also, and I'm sorry I didn't think about it earlier, as I was listening to Mr. Alardi and Mr. Powell about time frame and time perspectives. And so you're right. There's no legal limit on how long we can hold the property for the Flight and Seven Gables on Georgia Avenue. But one thing to consider is that our current capital project sales tax lists the public safety headquarters as number one, which means I have to get the ball rolling to start the money on that project before I can move on to other projects, to include things like the Greenway connector on Bluff Avenue, some of the interceptor projects we have for wastewater, or some of the road resurfacing projects. So every day or every month that we are not executing a spend plan on the public safety headquarters means we're still sitting on a bunch of other projects that we can't move forward on until we get moving on that. So that's just an item of consideration. That shouldn't be the sole consideration, but that's something that we're looking at from a financial perspective as well. So I'm sorry I didn't bring that up earlier. Do I have any other comments from our citizenry? Yes, sir. Mr. Powell.
And that is that City Council has said, better the devil we know than the devil we don't. And none of this is personal, Mr. Clifford. None of this is personal at all.
I got thick skin, Mr. Powell. Go ahead and throw it.
And I'm here as one of many citizens that's concerned about our future and where we're headed as a town. But City Council says, well, it might not be the best place, but it's better than something else being put there. Well, City Council owns the zoning requirements to that area of property. They themselves can control what is put there. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think they have some levels of control within the neighborhood preservation corridor district that we have, and there are rules associated with that. And so you're correct. There are some mechanisms that the City Council and the Planning Commission have to influence, what the look of a building is going to be as far as the rules associated with it, but they cannot prevent necessarily development at that site.
Okay. And the word the council likes to use is a liquor store. Somebody could put a liquor store there. You can't put a liquor store there and be in compliance with the neighborhood preservation overlay. You can't. You clearly can read it, and you cannot do it. There are specific requirements that were put in that development code to preserve these neighborhoods. Now, the city took it upon themselves to exempt themselves from those requirements, which I think was a very unethical move on the part of local government, personally. But I would like everybody to know what City Council says is we have no control over what gets put there. You do have control if you enforce your current development code as it is written today, unless you take that out in this next revision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Yes, Mr. Lardy.
I was kind of taken out of sorts when I started my presentation. I wanted to introduce myself and say who I am. And I'm just a citizen in this city. And when I came to this city 10 odd years ago, I looked for a location. And it happens to be a beautiful location. And I enjoy living there, and I enjoy the people in this city. And one of the things I enjoy the most is that people look out for each other. And the reason I came tonight is that I became friends with a lot of these people. And they're being put down right now because somebody wants to ruin their neighborhood. If somebody would want to move my neighborhood, I'd be up in arms. And one of the purposes of speaking is to say there needs to be a defense against that. We have zoning in place, we have rules in place, and yet they seem to change because somebody thinks it's a good idea. And it's a terrible idea. These people have lived in those houses forever. The gentleman who founded this city started it up there. And we're willing to take that piece of property and put public safety where cop cars are going to run in and out of it all day and all night to the detriment of these people who live in that neighborhood. That's wrong. That is absolutely wrong. Okay? Now, one of the reasons for speaking up is that there are not too many speakers tonight, obviously. And I would have hoped the room would have been filled, and I would have hoped we wore red shirts tonight, and I hope we would have been as adamant about this whole situation as I am right now. I'm an old man, and I've picked neighborhoods based upon where it's been comfortable to live. And unfortunately, this city has taken the approach, to hell with those people. We'll do whatever we want to do, and that's wrong. That's it all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lardy. Mr. Leverett, I believe the floor is yours.
I've got all the floors I need. Dave Leverett, 121 Butler Avenue. We have successfully identified that the founders of our city knew what they were doing, that the property where they have all walked on from day one is the best property to build anything you want to buy. It doesn't take any underground work. There's no water running through it, and everybody from the beginning of our city has said that's a good piece of property. A young boy who was 13 years old. I'll start with asking a question. The world is in turmoil now. I just talked with Mark. We're talking about how we've been through a severe time here for the last year, and now we're going to do it all again. We're all want some kind of break. We want to see a change, and I'm asking, if you want to have an inspiration, if there's some way to inspire North Augusta, if you want to build something in North Augusta that would inspire us as citizens, where would you do it?
Well, I think it's a leading question, sir, but I know exactly what you're going to say, which is there on Georgia Avenue at the Flight and Seven Gables property.
I'm not asking for an answer. I'm going to reflect on it a little bit. 13-year-old boy back in 1850 pointed to the bluffs that we're dealing with now and told his father, that's going to be my life's work. I'm going to make that place beautiful. Now, I don't know if he knew at the time that there was a trail up there and that there were a few homes up there, but that trail was Butler Avenue. It's probably rutted from wagon wheels, but already existed there. And there was a home probably over on the Thurman's house, which was a hotel, an inn. The Seven Gables was an inn. Not the Seven Gables, there was an inn there. Probably the Hampton House, and probably the house down there across from True North. Those were all up there on that ridge that we're talking about. I don't know if he knew that, but it was. Some 40 years later, he went, and not more than 100 yards from where this was being planned, he went and paid a descendant of the Butler family for 5,600 acres on which North Augusta was built. He then built Hampton Terrace Hotel, Lookaway Lodge, and Seven Gables, all in a period of about 18 months. And all of the East eastern part of the United States came. It inspired our nation. It inspired the leaders of our nation. It was a fantastic location. Unfortunately, 1916, New Year's Day, Hampton Terrace burned. But that didn't stop people from coming to North Augusta. There was still enough of his vision that brought many people here, and the rest of us have been brought here, and we have been attracted to his vision. His vision has consistently delivered inspiration to the citizens of North Augusta, and it does even now. It's a great place. It was destroyed, but the Hampton Terrace was obviously the main attraction. But there was enough there that in 1980, citizens of this city put together a plan that was presented to the National Historic Foundation, and that area up there where we're talking about was declared a National Historic Area, and it was put on whatever book they put that in, was put on, and it was approved in 1985. Now, furthermore, our own code, up until 2019, our own code says that the most important piece of property in the city of North Augusta, this piece of property. That's no surprise. Everybody, the Butler plantation started up there. Jackson was up there. Everybody has said, this is the piece of property. This is where it all happens. This is where it all starts. That piece of property is the piece of property that most prominent piece of property in all of North Augusta. Now, if we're going to inspire North Augusta, if that's what we want to do, if we want to do that, and we picked a piece of property, this one is the most pedigree for that, what would we put on it? We wanted to inspire our city. If we want to take an opportunity to inspire our city, what would we put there? Would we put a fire station? Would we put a police station? I have nothing against either one of those. But every city in this country has the opportunity to build a fire station and a public safety office. And they can do it on any plot of land they choose. But if there's going to be one place in North Augusta that can inspire us all to be better, can lift our city up to something more than it is right now, it's this piece of property. There's nothing better. There's not another one going to be made. It is the marquee location in North Augusta. And furthermore, Lord help me, Matthew chapter 5, verse 14. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. You want to inspire someone, the hill is the focal point. It is the place of inspiration. It's traditionally a place of inspiration. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither does someone light a lamp and put it under a basket. It's our light. That place is our light. It's our opportunity for light. What are we going to do with it? Now, I have presented a plan. You know this. I'm not going to present it.
I have it right here.
I'm not going to talk about it. That puts that facility in this place. But along with that, there's inspiration for the city. You cannot inspire this city by taking a building that was built to have its back up against a land berm, take it up with no changes, and plop it on the property line and cover it over with asphalt and say you've done your due diligence. It's irresponsible. There's more to North Augusta than this. We're not putting a bushel basket over our light. It's not what we're doing. We're pouring it over with asphalt. Basically the approach we're taking. Now there's a way. What I presented you is a concept. But that concept brings some inspiration and some light to the city on a location that should provide that for us, that has been that in the past, and it should be again. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Leverett. What I'd like to respond, if I could, to the comments, and really for our, Mr. Leverett and our citizens as well, is what we presented in the sketch plan review to the Planning Commission is really a first blush of things as far as where the building is sit and what the facade of the building is. I think there's still a lot of wiggle room on how we site the building, what the building is going to look like. When we made that presentation, it was really just to have a discussion, because that's really what it was, a discussion about the potential to have a public zoning option for Georgia Avenue. And so I don't view the facility that we presented as its final state. I think there is room to talk about the look of the building, and I think there's room to talk about the best location of the building, understanding that there will be some constraints when it comes to drainage and engineering works with the site. But I'm certainly willing to have those discussions from a design perspective, that if the city does proceed on Georgia Avenue, that we're able to have this kind of forum to talk about what the building is going to do and what it's going to look like. And there are some things that I think we have options for, and I think there are some things that we're going to have to kind of live with as is. But I'm certainly open to having those conversations. So what you saw in the sketch plan review, I don't view as the final end state of like, this is it, this is what the building's going to look like, and this is where it's going to sit.
Then it's going to cost you more money. And you've been arguing against that. There's no way to change the plan that you're talking about now without spending more money. You can't go to designmart.com and get what we're talking about here. We're talking about something that captures the spirit of North Augusta, which has been what this site represents to the citizens of North Augusta. It's what's this whole ridge. The whole ridge we're talking about here captures the essence of North Augusta, and the essence of North Augusta is not our municipal facilities. It's something that captures the heart of the people.
Thank you, Mr. Leverett. Appreciate your comments. Do we have any other comments from our citizens tonight? I'm sure we've got a few folks who haven't had the opportunity to speak yet. Yes, sir.
I'm Mike Hitchler. I live at 1300 George Avenue. And more than that, I've polled most of the neighbors on an observatory, London Smith, Bill Scott, the current residents from the Air property, Anna Laurie and Corey. And all of them tend to have the same view. And let me just preface something first. My favorite word is being an executive for Westinghouse is satisficing. And it kind of goes with what Mark mentioned. Usually you never have any perfect solution. Usually you've got to figure out what's the optimal solution given two bad choices. So as long as everyone can live with it but not be so unhappy that you've destroyed the organization, it's an okay decision. And the census of the folks I talked to was, the feeling is that, yes, we need to have a police station, a new station for our first responders. They also feel that the neighborhood's kind of in danger because that property, Seven Gables property, has been sitting there for an awful long time. There's been lots of gyrations in terms of turning it into an art center, None of that's worked. All we've had is methamphetamine folks taking up residence in those places. So some of those areas are dangerous, actually. So it's time to, on the observatory side, and I haven't talked to Nancy, but the observatory side feels that something's got to be done. And we can either be obstinate and try to fight everything and man the ramparts and go into 3 or 4 years of fighting on this. Or maybe what we need to do is to really work together on this. I personally, I think there are ways to do it, to get the police station there and the magistrate office, especially given that we have the reverence for the Blythe properties, and we have a good plan for how to have that as part of the beacon that Dave mentioned. And I think there are ways to do it. My biggest concern right now is that I mentioned to you, Tim, that that P designation, we fought it 2 years ago. It gives the city carte blanche to do virtually anything they want on the property, irrespective of what handshakes were. So I think if the city's going to move forward with this, there needs to be something where there's additional guidance given in 2 forms. One is that the Planning Commission gives guidance that puts onto the zoning, if there's a way to do it on the P, give it limitations on architectural designs, what fits in with the architecture of the neighborhood. And 2, that they have an actual citizens advisory board made up of members of the community up there in particular to give feedback as the designs evolve. As we all know, the devil's in the detail with this. And who knows where things are going to go if you're not here a year from now, which I hope you are still here. But who knows who will be in there and what agreements were set in place. As I said, the ideal thing to me was for the P zoning was what Aiken uses. Aiken says P zoning allows you to do a lot of things, but also has some specific requirements for the historic district. That says you have to show compatibility when you put things like public buildings in place. So again, I think the city, as Fred mentioned and a number of folks mentioned, we need to make sure that we made the right decision and we didn't rush to judgment on the site. I also think that there are ways in which we can make the George Avenue site work. Thank you.
So, Mr. Hetzer, to that end, I would tell you that, you know, we've unpacked the current kind of preservation, you know, overlay and seeing what that looks like. And there are some, you know, truth in advertising. There are definitely some areas that we are not going to be compliant with that code if we go to Georgia Avenue. And so, for example, you know, that code states that you can only have operations during certain hours. A public safety, the court will meet that requirement, but the public safety headquarters is a 24/7 operation. So we're not going to meet that requirement. Another requirement of that code talks about the overall square footage of the building, which I think is 3,000. We're not going to hit that. We're obviously going to be well above that item. But I think there are areas in that code that we want to make sure we're compliant with. And so, you know, one of the examples has to do with the roofs and having pitch roofs, and that certainly fits a little more in with the area and the tenor, if you will, of the neighborhood as well. So I'm certainly committed to trying to get to yes with as many folks with me as I can, and I'm certainly open to having discussions that we can have about design. I'm not sure about the Planning Commission and how that works with their the rules and caveats they can put on top of that, and we can certainly have that discussion. But I would tell you that in any way that I can be compliant with the neighborhood preservation overlay, I intend to do so, and certainly does the council.
Well, I could see as part of the council when they vote on it, that there could be certain types of guidance or restrictions put on it from that standpoint.
I can certainly look into that, and if they give me guidance, whether through resolution or ordinance, then I'm bound to that.
I hope we can use this as a springboard to look into the broader picture of how the overlays and other things should operate or not operate, especially related to P-type designation.
Yes, sir. Do we have another comment from the back? Yes, sir.
I just have a couple of questions. My name's Al LaFavor, live at 121 Butler. It's been called the Sunshine Cottage. This piece of property was bought from the Butler family in a descendant, Mattie Mealing, that sold all the land that became the city of North Augusta to James Jackson. And she sold the lot that my house, well, 2 lots that my house is on, to Howard and Nancy Carson. Nancy Carson was the one that founded the Nancy Carson Library. They bought that property from her, paid $1,000 just for the lot in 1913. And the reason they did, they had spent a lot of time coming to the Hampton Terrace and enjoyed that and enjoyed the city of North Augusta, and decided they'd build a winter cottage there. They were from Massachusetts, up cold in the winter, so they enjoyed coming here. I've lived there since 1980. Done a good bit of work on the house to restore it. Enjoy living there. Have good neighbors. Basically a fairly quiet neighborhood. Knew that it was in the historical register, and that the city, for that reason apparently, or for some reason, put a neighborhood overlay, a protective overlay, and to this point has prevented things like the fire station or the public safety or any large building or anything with a lot of traffic going there. But as was said before, the city has exempted themselves from that. So I just have a couple of questions. One other thing, I noticed that this meeting was not put on the city event calendar until Tuesday. Now, it may have been advertised in other ways, but if someone was looking to see when the city was having meetings, that wasn't there until this Tuesday. So 2 days is not much notice if you're going by the city calendar. There's also a public safety update project page on that's supposed to give pretty good information about what's going on. And there were, I guess, a couple of questions asked there. One of them was there going to be a jail? And the answer was, no, there's not going to be a jail. And it was clarified a little bit later to me that there were going to be holding cells. And my question is, what's the difference between a holding cell and a jail cell? I looked up the definition on the Wikipedia, which isn't always the best place, but it's easy. And they use the word interchangeably. They said prison cell, jail cell, holding cell. You know, it's got bars, you lock people in there, it's a secure area. So my question is, what are the holding cells going to look like? Do we have any pictures or anything in the new building up there? Are they going to look any different than the jail cells down in the North Augusta jail that's been there forever?
So I will defer to Chief Thomas on some of the mechanics here to my left of, what the difference doctrinally is between a holding cell / jail cell. What I would tell you as a matter of course is that we are not designed for long-term holding. So somebody that's going to do an overnight stay, we actually eat up a fair amount of manpower where our public safety officers have to transport prisoners to the Aiken County jail facility. So that's, we lose, a fair amount of time where they're driving the folks there to the jail, get them processed there, and then, drive back home to North Augusta on their shift. So they're holding folks there for a limited amount of time for a limited purpose, but they're not holding people there overnight for a variety of reasons, mostly because it's not a jail. We don't have corrections officers there in the public safety headquarters, and that is not a core function of what our public safety officers do. But I'll give this mic to Chief Thomas, see if he'd like to add something on the holding cell versus the jail concept.
Thank you, Mr. LaFavor. Great question. About 2 years ago, when that building, my building I currently am located in, was looked at, and obviously we had some issues with mold and mildew. So at that point, I made the decision along with the city administrator to close that jail. So there is no jail per se in the city of North Augusta. So as Mr. Clifford alluded to, we currently transport, if we arrest somebody tonight, that person will go to Aiken County Jail. That's the agreement that myself and the sheriff have. So there is no jail cell in the city of North Augusta currently. Now, what this plan calls for, after we've done iteration after iteration and we've looked at this thing, and it's such a liability to hold a person in a jail cell. So that in itself meant to me that what we did, there's no holding cells in that facility, okay? And that may be a misprint. I'll go back and look at that. There's a question of a individual where we bring somebody in, and that would be, I'll give you an example, like a data master machine, which measures the alcohol level of a person. We will have that in place where that person's assumed to be under the influence of alcohol. So at that point, we give him the test, him or her the test, and at that point, if he blows or she blows that particular level, then we transport that person directly to jail. So there's no incarceration going to take place in this new facility. We will maybe hold them for a small time of a period. Even so, somebody gets involved in a crime, they'll be brought in for questioning, but they won't be in a jail cell or in a holding facility in that facility at all. Does that help?
A little bit. So you had the old jail cells down here taken out,
They're not out. They're still in place, but they're not in use.
so they kind of boarded off, or?
That's correct.
Okay. So, and it doesn't happen much in North Augusta, but suppose someone holds up the bank with a gun,
Mm-hmm.
you catch him, you're going to take him straight to Aiken, you're not going to bring him in here?
If we bring him in, we bring him in for questioning, and he'd be handcuffed to a chair or a piece of pipe or something in the floor. It won't be in a jail cell, no, sir.
Okay, and that's why we have the two sally ports to get this supposedly dangerous person in the building.
Mm-hmm. There'll be two sally ports. One is the court side, which we'll have court in, and prisoners that are brought back that have to go through a bond hearing will be brought before the judge there. The other one would be a multi-purpose use, like I just explained to you, a data master. And it could be something as maybe we take in evidence like a car that we would have to process. But those are the reasons for some of the two sally ports.
Okay, so you said something about bringing prisoners back for a bond hearing. We'd go back to Aiken and get them and bring them back down to North Augusta?
Possibly, yes, sir. Now, we've at the age now where we do video conferencing through Aiken County, so a lot of that could be done through video, but there's still people who cannot make that bond would have to come back before the judge and be seen on occasion.
Okay, so regardless of what we call the room or whatever it is, there will be some possibly dangerous people in and out of that building, even if it's for a short period of time.
Well, I can't predict,
No,
dangerous people, but you can understand the business that we're
History
in.
tells us that somebody's going to be dangerous going up there. We wouldn't have a sally port, and we wouldn't have a place to handcuff them to a pipe and that kind of thing.
Well, it's a functional building. Yes, sir.
Okay. The other question I had, I think the drawing shows 165 parking spaces. How many parking spaces do we have at the existing facility, the jail and the court?
Yeah, somewhere from 100, 115, correct. That's right.
Are we short spaces here? Do we need more spaces, or?
I think we do in the future. I right now currently have 66 sworn police officers and firefighters who carry 2 certifications, so that's a need, and we have courts that obviously people go back and forth to. So, with that said, yes, sir.
Okay. That's all I have.
Thanks, sir. Any other comments? Questions? Well, I thank you all for your time and involvement this evening. Our next public event will be this coming city council meeting on Monday. The city council meeting is at 6 o'clock. There'll be a study session prior to that, I believe at 5, but city council's at 6, and this will be one of the items that will be discussed. So if you would like to talk directly to the city council, you have the opportunity to do so at that time. But I appreciate your time and attention tonight. Lots of great feedback for us here on the staff and for our engineers and for our public safety officers. So I appreciate the citizen involvement and your time here this evening. Hope you have a good night.